Picture the most famous palace on earth. 2,300 rooms under one endless roof, mirrors taller than trees, gold leaf on the rain gutters. Now fill it with the smell of a barnyard. Add pickpockets working the marble courtyards in broad daylight. Princes of the blood quarrelling over the honour of holding a candlestick. Corridors used as latrines by people wearing diamonds, and a machine 3 miles away that screams day and night so the fountains can run for 20 minutes. That's Versailles. The most polished building in Europe and one of the dirtiest. A place where a farm boy could rent a sword at the gate for a few coins in the afternoon and stand watching the King of France eat his soup by evening. Legally, openly, because the palace belonged in the strangest way to everyone. We're going back there tonight, not as tourists craning our necks in the Hall of Mirrors. We're going in through the service gate. 1 year, one person. Everything he would have seen, smelled, heard, hauled, scrubbed and survived. In the last year the palace was ever a home. So I make these history stories, and honestly I still can't tell whether anyone actually sleeps to them, or whether you're all just weirdos who like hearing about duchesses stepping over puddles in the stairwells, and kitchen boys selling the king's half-burned candles for pocket money. Either way, subscribe if you want. Get comfortable. One honest note before we go through the gate, because this channel runs on trust. The buildings, the dates, the prices, the astonishing rules, all of that is documented, and wherever the record goes soft and historians start arguing, I'll tell you plainly which is which. But the boy whose eyes you're about to borrow is stitched together from the thousands of real servants who lived exactly this life and never got their names written down anywhere except a wage ledger. The rooms are real, the eyes are borrowed. Eyes are. That's the deal, every time. Here we go. The dough is winning. Your arms gave out somewhere around the 40th loaf, so now you're kneading from the shoulders, throwing your whole body behind each fold the way Maître Berthaud taught you, rocking on the balls of your feet because your hands stopped being hands an hour ago and became two aching tools that happened to be attached to you. The trough in front of you is longer than a coffin and twice as wide, and the dough in it moves like something alive, sucking at your fists, resisting, giving way, resisting again. It is 4 o'clock in the morning, and if this batch is not shaped, proofed, and in the oven before the bell of St. Louis strikes 5, 300 people will sit down to breakfast with no bread, and every one of them will know whose fault it is. That's the first thing to understand about your life. You are not baking for the king. You will never bake for the king. You are baking for the people who cook, for the people who serve the people, who dress and feed and carry the king. Servants of servants of servants, and they are pickier than any duke. The heat hits you in waves. Behind you, the great oven roars. Not a fireplace. An oven you could walk into standing up, its mouth glowing orange, its breath strong enough to crisp the hair on your forearms when you swing the long peel in. Fournier the ovenman feeds it split beech logs, and the wood cracks and spits, and every crack makes the shadows jump across the vaulted ceiling, across the flour dust hanging in the air like fog, across the rows of proofing baskets lined up on the boards like soldiers. Then the smells sort themselves out of the heat, layer by layer, the way they do every morning. Yeast first, sour, alive, filling your head. Wood smoke underneath it, sweet and sharp. Scorched flour where someone let the peel linger. Tallow from the lamp guttering on its nail. And under all of it, the bass note of every room you've ever stood in since you came here. Sweat. Old sweat and new sweat, yours and everyone else's, worked into wool and wood and stone so deep that no scrubbing will ever get it out. Welcome to the bakehouse of the Grand Commune, Versailles, Kingdom of France. The 26th of August, 1788. Your name is Michel. You're 16 years old, and you have been inside this building for 2 years, ever since your uncle walked you the 50 leagues from a dead farm near Falaise in Normandy, with a spare shirt, your father's clasp knife, and a letter addressed to a cousin who scrubbed copper in the king's kitchens. The cousin was dead by the time you arrived. The letter got you in anyway, because down here, at the bottom of the greatest household on earth, they always need another pair of hands that doesn't complain. Back home, everyone said Versailles would swallow you whole. They weren't wrong. They just didn't understand what a privilege it is some years to be swallowed. Because here is what nobody in your village could believe, what you wrote to the priest to read aloud to your grandmother, what she reportedly called a sinful lie. You eat every day, twice, meat on meat days, fish on fish days, bread without measuring, wine, thin, sour, watered, but wine, with both meals. In the year of your birth, your parents ate chestnut porridge for a whole winter. You've watched men in this building scrape half a chicken into the slop pail because they didn't care for the sauce. The palace is always hungry. That's what Maître Berthaud says, and he's been saying it for 30 years. The palace is always hungry, and as long as it is, you will never be. You should be able to see the palace from here, and you can't, and that tells you everything about your place in the world. The Grand Commune is a building most visitors never look at twice. A huge, plain, 4-story block of cream-coloured stone standing just south of the palace, across the Rue de la Surintendance. Built 100 years ago, 1682, finished in 1684 when the court first moved here for good, by Jules Hardouin Mansart, the same architect who built the Hall of Mirrors. Same architect, same stone, no gold. It is a hollow square wrapped around a courtyard big enough to drill a company of soldiers in, and into it are packed the kitchens, the bakehouse, the larders, the pantries, the wood stores, the wine cellars, and the lodgings of somewhere around 1,000 people. Cooks, scullions, pastrymen, roasters, water carriers, laundry workers, ushers, chair carriers, clerks, chapel singers, apothecaries. A whole town folded up and fitted inside one building, pressed door to door and bed to bed, 4 floors of snoring, quarrelling, cooking humanity. And when I say the Grand Commune feeds people, I need you to understand what that means in the France of 1788. This is not a canteen. This is one of the largest catering operations in the world. The kitchens under and around you serve, every single day, hot dinners to hundreds upon hundreds of officers and servants of the household, laid at different tables of strict and jealous rank. Because at Versailles, even lunch is a ceremony, even soup knows your station. There are tables where they eat off silver. There are tables where the wine is better than anything a Falaise innkeeper will pour in his life. And there is the scrubbed plank bench where you eat, last, standing half the time, with the other boys, whatever came back or came out wrong. This morning it will be the burnt loaf. There is always a burnt loaf. It is always yours. Yeah, you eat the failures. That's normal. Every boy at your level does. The good crusts go up the ladder rank by rank, the way everything in this place goes up a ladder. And what comes down the ladder is what the ladder doesn't want. You've learned not to mind. The burnt loaf is still bread. In the village you came from this year, that sentence would make you a rich man. Because this is the other thing pressing on you this particular morning. The thing the carters bring in with every load of flour like a smell you can't scrub out. The harvest has failed. 6 weeks ago, the 13th of July, a date the whole kingdom will remember, A hailstorm came down on the best grain country in France like the wrath of God. Hailstones the size of hen's eggs, they say, some swear bigger. It flattened the wheat standing in the fields an hour before some of it would have been cut. From Normandy to Champagne, a belt of ruin 60 leagues long. The carters describe fields that look trampled by armies, and what the hail spared, the drought before it had already starved. Flour is climbing, quietly, steadily, a few deniers here, a few sous there, climbing the way water climbs a cellar stair. Fournier reads the bakehouse accounts over the clerk's shoulder and comes back grim. In Paris, 12 miles away, the 4-pound loaf, the loaf a working family lives on, costs 9 sous already and is not finished rising. A labourer earns maybe 20, 25 sous a day. Do that arithmetic the way you have learned to do arithmetic here, on your fingers in the dark. When bread hits 14 or 15 sous, a man works more than half his day just to eat, before rent, before firewood, before his children. You do that arithmetic, and then you look at the trough of white dough under your hands, white flour sifted twice for servants, and you feel something you don't have a word for yet. It isn't guilt, quite. It's more like standing in a dry house watching the river rise around your neighbours. Michel, Bertholle's voice from the oven end. He never shouts. He has never needed to. The dough is proving, not you, shape. You shape. Fold, turn, tuck, the seam underneath, the round tightening under your palms like a drumhead. Flip it into the flour-dusted basket. Next. Your hands know this without you. That's what 2 years buys. Fold, turn, tuck, flip. Next. The line of baskets grows. Across the trough, Colas works his own line, half a beat faster than you, because Colas is a year older and never lets you forget it, and because Colas does everything half a beat faster than everyone, which is why he is going to get himself either promoted or hanged. Colas is the boy you share a bed with, up under the roof, in a room the size of a stable stall that sleeps 4. Yeah, you share a bed. That's normal. Everyone at your level shares. A bed to yourself is a luxury reserved for men with wages you can't imagine. At least Colas doesn't thrash. He talks in his sleep, but only numbers, prices. Even asleep, Colas is counting. The bell of Saint Louis strikes 5 as the last loaves slide off the peel into the dark of the oven, and Fournier swings the iron door shut with a clang that you will still hear some nights 60 years from now if you live that long. Berthaud looks at the closed door, then at the two of you, flour to the elbows, sweat cutting channels through the white on your faces. Late, he says. You are not late. He says this every morning. You have learned, the way you learn everything here, from a boot or a ladle or a cuff on the ear, not to argue. But this morning he adds something. He wipes his hands on his apron slow and looks at nothing and says, "Enjoy the smell, boys. There are children your age 2 days' walk from here who have forgotten it." Then he goes to see to the soup kettles because the palace is always hungry, and the day, your day, one day of the 14 months that are going to take this whole world apart, has properly begun. While the loaves bake, you get your hour. Not an hour of rest, an hour of everything else. You haul in beech logs from the courtyard stack until your arms remember they exist and object. You sluice the trough. You scrape dough off your knuckles with the back of a knife. And then you climb, because before the refectories fill, a boy's work runs upward. The staircase you use is bare stone, worn into shallow scoops by a century of feet, lit by borrowed daylight from windows on the courtyard. 4 flights. On the first floor live the important officers of the household, men with titles like controller and clerk of the kitchen, men whose lodgings have fireplaces and curtained beds, and in one astonishing case you have personally seen through an open door, a carpet. On the second floor the middling sort, on the third the lesser, and under the roof, in the long low attics where the summer heat gathers like a held breath, and the winter cold comes through the tiles, the boys and the last hired and the no-ones. Yours is the fourth door, a room 3 paces by 4, 2 beds, 4 sleepers, 1 window the size of a serving tray, 1 chest, 1 basin, 1 jug. On the wall, a cheap print of St. Michael, your mother's saint and yours, spearing his devil so faded by damp that the devil has nearly escaped. Beneath your side of the bed, where the frame meets the wall, hangs a linen sack about the size of a piglet, and this sack is the single most valuable thing you have ever owned. And you need to understand it, because this sack is Versailles. It is full of candle ends. Here is the rule, and I promise you it is real, and it made men rich. At the court of France, a candle, once lit, is never lit again. Never. A candle burns for an evening in a gallery or an antechamber or on a card table, and whatever is left of it when the company rises, half, 2/3, sometimes a barely kissed stub of fine white beeswax as long as your hand, is finished as far as the king's household is concerned, dead, spent, and everything spent in this palace becomes instantly somebody's lawful property. The grand officers hold the rights to the noble leavings. The used candles of the state apartments alone are worth. People swear tens of thousands of livres a year to the men who hold the privilege. What trickles down to the bottom of the ladder are the tag ends of the tag ends, kitchen stubs, corridor stubs, the tallow ends nobody with a title will stoop for. Boys may gather what their betters wave away. You've been gathering for 2 years. Everything at Versailles is somebody's right. The ashes from the grates are somebody's right. The empty bottles are somebody's right. The grease skimmed from the roasting pans, somebody's right. Sold to soap makers, worth real money. The king's household leaks wealth from every seam the way a wet barrel weeps, and an entire nation of servants lives with its mouth pressed to the seams. Nobody calls it stealing. It is the opposite of stealing. It is inheritance, custom, wages in kind, older than anyone's grandfather. When you understand the candle ends, you understand the whole machine. Your sack is perhaps 2/3 full. Wax ends bring the best price. A chandler in town gives 8, 9, 10 sous the pound for clean beeswax because he melts it down and sells it back, and there is a joke in town that the same wax has lit the palace 100 times, that some of it has been burning since Louis XIV. Tallow brings 2 or 3. You weigh the sack in your hand every morning the way a miser weighs a purse, and every morning it is a little heavier, and inside your head lives a number. What it will be worth, come winter, when candle prices rise. It is the only arithmetic you own outright. Colas keeps no sack. Colas converts everything to coin the same week he gets it, because Colas says a boy's hoard is just a gift you're storing for whoever robs you. Colas keeps his wealth in a different shape entirely, in chalk. But that comes later in the morning. Everything with Colas comes later, at the exact moment it profits him. You wash at the basin, cold water, yesterday's, a grey film on it, and put on your working clothes, which is to say you take off nothing and add a clean apron, because the bakehouse owns your shirt now, and there is no sense pretending otherwise. Rough hemp shirt, wool breeches gone shiny at the knee, wooden-soled shoes that announce you on stone like a drum. But over the chest, on a nail, hangs your one bit of pride, a coat. A real coat of blue-grey wool, third hand, cut down by your sister from something a valet's valet discarded, with all its buttons, all of them, and no patch that shows unless you lift your arm. In the town of Versailles, that coat marks you as a man with a place, a man inside the machine, a man who eats. Appearances matter in this town. They matter more than almost anything, because everyone here is measured by exactly one question. How close do you stand to the king? You stand about as far as a person can stand while still sleeping under a royal roof, but you sleep under it. The coat says so. Down again, 4 flights, drum, 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 through the smell strata of the building. Attic mustiness, then someone's morning pot, then coffee, actual coffee. Outside a clerk's door on the first floor, a smell like wealth itself. And into the roar of the ground floor, where the Grand Commune does the thing it was built for. The refectories are filling, and when I say the household sits down to eat, I need you to understand what that means, because there is nothing like it left in the world. This is not one dining hall. It is a system of tables, dozens of them, each with its own rank, its own budget written down in the registers of the king's household, its own bill of fare, its own jealously counted dishes. The masters of ceremony have tables, the chaplains have tables, the king's wine merchants, the ushers, the surgeons, the musicians of the chapel. Tables, 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 each one a rung, and every man in this building can tell you to the dish exactly what every rung above his own is eating. The table of the grand officers gets so many entrees, so many roasts, so much wine of such a quality. The clerk, 2 rungs down, watches those platters go by, the way a fisherman watches another man's net. Your job from 6 until the bell is to carry bread to the tables in baskets that start the morning heavier than you are. Soup in copper kettles, 2 boys to a kettle, the handle searing through the rag in 30 steps. You count steps. Everyone counts steps. The corridor from the soup kitchen to the far refectory is 112, and you hate everyone after 80. Wood to the fires, water to the cooks. You move at the pace of a man escaping something all morning, every morning, and you keep your eyes down and your elbows in, because a boy who spills soup on a clerk of the kitchen will be beaten, and a boy who spills soup on the floor has murdered soup, which is worse. You pass Maître Berthaud's own kitchen at the quarter hour, and through the doorway in the steam and clatter, you catch the sight you catch every morning, the copper, walls of it, pots and fish kettles and moulds and ladles, scoured with sand and vinegar until they hold small red suns in their bellies, hanging in ranks by size like the armour of some fat brigade. And on the high shelf above Berthaud's own station, apart from the working metal, one pan that never comes down, a tourtière, a covered pie pan, its tin lining worn to the copper at the centre, polished. You have seen him do it Sunday nights, with a rag and rotten stone, slowly, like a man saying a rosary, and never, not once in your 2 years, used. Cola says it belonged to Berthaud's wife, who kept a cook shop with him in Rouen before the palace took him, and who died of the fever the same year he came here. Cola says a lot of things, but you have noticed that on the shelf where the tourtière sits, no other pan is ever allowed, and that the one boy who stacked a saucepan there, in your first spring, was moved to the scullery by Friday and gone by Lady Day. A cook's pan outlives kings, Berthaud said once. Apropos of nothing, watching you scour. It was years before you understood he wasn't talking about tin. At 9 you eat, standing at the plank. Burnt loaf, hot from the oven's bad corner, and a bowl of the boys' soup. Barley, carrots, the ends of yesterday's ends. It is, and you never let yourself forget it, more than your father ate on the day he died. Colas materializes beside you the way he does, already chewing, and jerks his chin toward the courtyard door. Cerdo day, he says. Tuesday. Best day. You're carrying for me at noon. I'm hauling wood at noon. You're carrying for me at noon, Colas says, with the patience of a bishop, because Tuesday the king dines meat, and what the king's table doesn't finish walks out of this palace on legs like ours. And I have spent 1 year and 4 months learning exactly which door it walks out of, and exactly which stair is quickest. And I am offering to teach you for free. Nothing with you is free. Colas grins and taps the door frame where you have walked past it 400 times and never once seen it. There is a small chalk mark, low down, the height of a boy's hand, a cross with a dot. Everything with me is free, he says, for family. Eat your crust, Norman. Today you learn where the king's dinner goes when the king is done with it. And this is how you learn the first rule of the Grand Commune. The palace wastes nothing, because the palace is not allowed to. 1,000 mouths below the king are aimed at everything he does not swallow. At noon, then, you follow Colas across the Rue de la Surintendance, and in through the service wings of the palace itself, down passages the guidebooks of a later century will never mention, low, whitewashed, gouged at cart height, floored in worn brick, loud with the traffic of trays. This is the palace's bloodstream, and you are one of its corpuscles, invisible by design. The gorgeous rooms are only the skin. Everything that keeps the skin alive moves through here, through you. Colas walks like he owns the passage, which is how Colas walks everywhere, and lectures under his breath like a tutor. The word is Cerdo. There's an office called that. Real office, real officers, been there forever. When the king's table is cleared, the dishes don't go back to the kitchen. They go to the Cerdo. Everything the great tables send back. The roast nobody carved past the second slice. The fish nobody touched. 40 entrees that got looked at. All of it lands there. Some feeds tables inside. And the rest, Norman, the beautiful rest, is sold. Sold to who? To Versailles. He spreads his arms, nearly clipping a passing tray of glasses, apologizes to the tray with a grace he never wastes on people. There are women in town who buy the leavings by the basket and sell them off cheap stalls by the carré, and half this town has eaten off the king's menu at second hand and paid a few sous for the honour. Perch in the king's own sauce for the price of bad sausage. They call the stalls the king's leavings, or worse, and nobody blushes. Why would they? It's the best food in France once removed. You will learn the numbers over the following weeks because Colas cannot keep a number to himself. A basket of returned roasts bought at the palace door for so much, retailed piece by piece at the stall for half again more. The reseller's margin may be 15, 20 sous on a good basket. The officers of the Cerdo, holders of yet another beautiful right, skimming their lawful skim off the top of it all. That difference, buy the basket at 40 sous, clear 60 at the stall, multiplied across every royal dinner of the year, is a living, not a fortune. A living for dozens of families in this town, conjured out of the simple fact that a king must be offered 40 dishes and cannot eat 9, and what Colas has, what the chalk marks are, is intelligence. A cross with a dot, meat day, heavy table, rich returns, a cross alone. lean day. A crescent. The court is at Fontainebleau or Marly and the stream runs dry. Don't waste your noon. He has marks like this chalked low on door frames along the whole service route. A boy-high ledger written on the palace itself, updated as quietly as prices move, and the women at the stalls pay him, in coin, in pastry, in warnings, to know which mornings to bring 2 baskets. He is 17 years old, and he has made himself, in 1 year and 4 months, a very small, very illegal feeling, entirely legal bourse of leftovers. One day, Colas says, watching a tureen of untouched soup sail past at shoulder height, I'll have a cook shop in Paris, Rue Saint-Honoré, and I'll serve suppers half the Palais Royal will queue for, and I will never once stand in a corridor smelling another man's dinner. That, and he taps his temple, is what the chalk is for. Every mark is a brick. You carry his basket down to the stalls by the market that noon, and this is where the town of Versailles closes over you, and you need to see this town clearly, because no place like it has ever existed before or since. Understand. 130 years ago there was almost nothing here. A hill, a mill, a huddle of houses, a hunting lodge. Then the king planted his palace on the hill, and a town condensed around it, the way frost condenses on glass, street by street, trade by trade, until by this year, 1788, something like 50 or 60,000 people live here, and every last one of them, if you trace the coin in their pocket back far enough, is paid by the palace. It is a company town, the grandest company town on earth. The company makes monarchy. The innkeepers live off the courtiers' visitors. The courtiers' servants live off the courtiers. The laundresses live off everyone, because everyone at court must be white at the collar. The wood-sellers, the wig-makers, the sedan chairmen, the sword-cutlers, the seamstresses, the letter-writers, the horse-dealers, the 2,000 market gardeners out along the avenues who grow salad for the tables you serve. When the court sneezes, the town says, God bless you. When the court travels, the town lays men off. There is a saying here you have heard a dozen ways. When the king dines well, Versailles eats. Nobody says the other half of the saying aloud. Nobody has needed to. Yet. Madame Rosalie's stall stands third from the corner by the market square, under a canvas awning gone the colour of weak tea, and Madame Rosalie herself stands behind it like a general behind a rampart. A wide, quick-eyed woman of 50 in an apron washed thin, who can carve a returned capon into 11 sellable portions in under a minute, you have counted, and who greets Colas's basket the way other women greet grandchildren. What's he sent me, the darling? She means the king, she always means the king. She flips the cloth, inventories the basket in one raking glance, roast veal half untouched, a compote, good bread, the fine white manchets from the king's own bakery, worlds above even your bakehouse's best. Veal's tired, 40. 45, Colas says. It's Tuesday veal. Your ladies fight for Tuesday. My ladies fight for anything with the palace smell on it, and you are an extortionate little weasel. 42. 44. And I tell you which day next week not to buy at all. Rosalie's eyes narrow. Information, again. Always the real currency. 43, and the Norman eats. She's already wrapping a heel of white bread and a slice of the tired veal in a cabbage leaf and pressing it on you, because that is the other thing about Rosalie. The thing that will matter later in the bad winter. She feeds boys. Not from softness, she insists, from bookkeeping. A fed boy remembers you. A starved boy remembers nothing but the starving. Eat. Done, says Colas. and you stand there in the market noise eating the King of France's veal from a cabbage leaf, and it is, you will defend this opinion for the rest of your life, the best thing you have ever tasted, and not because of the sauce, because of the distance it travelled to reach you, all the way down the longest ladder in the world. Your sister's pitch is at the other end of the market's gravitation, up by the Place d'Armes, the huge fan of parade ground that opens before the palace gates, where 3 avenues wide enough for 6 carriages abreast come together aimed at the king's bedroom like spokes at a hub. This is where the town faces the palace, where the 2 worlds mix all day long, and so this is where everything is sold to everyone. Chestnuts, ribbons, pamphlets, lemonade from tanks carried on men's backs, songs, lodging, haircuts, salvation, and flowers. Thérèse has the flower basket she carried from Normandy, and a folding stool she paid too much for, and a spot near the right-hand gate she defends by treaty, sharp elbows, and the friendship of the sergeant's wife who sells stockings beside her. She's 19. She has your mother's level grey eyes and a talent you entirely lack. She can talk to anyone, any rank, any mood, and leave them convinced the conversation was their idea. In Falaise, that talent would have gotten her married to a tanner by now. Here it earns. You smell like the king's dinner, she says by way of greeting. I ate the king's dinner, and they say there's no progress in France. She rearranges stems, watching the gate traffic past your shoulder the whole time, because Thérèse watches everything. Late August is a good season at the gates. Petitioners, sightseers, provincials come to gawk, clerks, soldiers, and all of them, she has learned, will pay 3 times Tuesday's price for a flower on a Sunday if their sweetheart is watching, and nothing at all if it rains. She buys at the growers' carts before dawn, a sou the bunch, sells at 2 and 3, on a feast day, 5. On a superb week she clears perhaps 4 livres. Room and washing with the laundress above Rosalie's shop cost her 30 sous of it. What is left goes, coin by coin, into a stocking rolled inside her spare petticoat, toward the thing she wants with a patience that frightens you slightly, a licensed stall of her own, a roof, a place no rain can cancel. 2 years more, she says when you ask, which you do every time to hear her certainty. 2 good years and I stop being Weather's servant. Everyone in this town serves somebody, Michel. I'm just choosing the master that can't die. You do not know it yet. How could you? But you will remember that sentence for 60 years. It's while you're standing there, licking veal grease off your thumb like a gentleman of leisure, that the crowd by the gate does the thing it does a dozen times a day. It eddies, and parts, and lets through a fresh knot of visitors making for the palace. Ordinary visitors. A stout provincial notary, by the look of him, with his wife on his arm and his son gaping upward. They stop at a trestle table set up in the shadow of the railings, 10 paces from Thérèse's pitch, and there a small, neat, ancient man in a suit the colour of snuff rises to meet them with the bow of a courtier and the eye of a horse-trader. That's Père Guillot. And what Père Guillot rents, from his trestle by the gate of the greatest palace on earth, is the appearance of a gentleman. Because here is the astonishing thing, the thing you must tell people about this place, the signature fact of Versailles. The palace is open to anyone. Any man decently dressed can walk in through those gates, past those guards, up those marble stairs, and stroll through the state apartments of the King of France, as if he held an invitation from God. No ticket, no name taken. The king lives in public the way the sun shined in public. Being seen is the whole point of him. There are only standards. A man must look respectable. Clean coat, no rags. And a man must wear a sword and carry a hat, because a sword and a hat are what a gentleman wears. And so, at the gates, for as long as anyone can remember, men like Guillaume have rented them out. A sword and a hat, hired at the railing of Versailles the way a later age will hire umbrellas. The nobility's whole sacred costume 6 sous for the afternoon, deposit extra, mind the scabbard on the parquet, monsieur. You watch the notary count out coins. You watch Guillaume gird a slightly spotted hanger around that round provincial waist, settle a black hat on the man's head, step back, and survey his work exactly like Berthold checking a roast. Each of Guillaume's swords carries a little brass tag wired to the guard, stamped with a number so his stock comes home to him. The one the notary gets is number 23. You can see the tag wink in the sun. And then the notary, transformed, gentleman number 23, leads his family in through the gates of Versailles, with his chin 2 inches higher than it was a minute ago. A sword makes a gentleman, Guillaume says to no one in particular, resetting his trestle. The way a saucepan makes a cook. He catches you staring and winks. Don't laugh, boy. The palace itself is only rented. They just have a longer lease. Therese looks from the gates to you, and you can see the idea land in her the same instant it lands in you, the way ideas always strike you both together, one womb's timing. Sunday, she says, the Grand Couvert, we're going to watch the king eat. But before Sunday, water, because there is always water, and water is how you know old Pichon. And old Pichon is how you will come to understand, better than any courtier ever understood it, what this palace actually costs. The kitchens drink like a garrison. Soup water, scouring water, scalding water, water for the fish tanks, water for the mash of sand and vinegar that keeps the copper honest. Some of it comes from the building's own supply, but when the pressure drops, and in late summer, with the reservoirs low, it drops most days. The boys go out with yokes and buckets to the fountains, and you stand in line at the trough with half the town. The town of Versailles, understand, is a thirsty town on a dry hill. That is the great joke of the place, the joke that cost millions. The Sun King planted the most fountain-mad palace in history in a countryside with no river. Everything wet in Versailles is here against nature's will, hauled uphill by force, and the force has a name. And on quiet nights, when the wind sets from the north, you can hear it, a sound like a giant grinding its teeth in its sleep, rhythmic, endless, miles off. The first week you slept in the attic, you thought it was thunder that never finished. Colas laughed at you for a day and a half. It's the machine of Morley, 3 miles north down on the Seine. They built it 100 years ago, 1684, the great wheels first turned, and travellers came from across Europe just to stare at it, because nothing like it existed anywhere. 14 water wheels standing in the river, each one nearly 40 feet across, driving hundreds of pumps through a forest of rocking iron beams, forcing river water up the hillside, 500 feet of lift, stage by stage, tank by tank, to the aqueduct at the top, and so, by channels and reservoirs, to the fountains of Marly and Versailles. The wonder of the age. It has been groaning, clanking, leaking, and half breaking down for a century. It eats repairs the way the court eats candles, and it screams so constantly that people in the villages near it are said to notice only when it stops. Old Pichon is one of the fountain men, les fontainiers, the tribe of pipe keepers and valve priests who tend the palace's water the way sextons tend a church. He is past 60, built like a hinge, walks with a list to the left where a frozen valve wheel took him into a wall in the winter of '76, and he has, on a ring at his belt, iron keys to doors in this palace that dukes do not know exist. You met him your first month, when Berthaud sent you to beg extra water for a fish day, and he has tolerated you since, which those who know him assure you is his warmest known setting. This afternoon you find him at the fountain court with his ear, literally his ear, pressed flat against a bronze standpipe, eyes shut, listening to it the way a physician listens to a chest. "She's short today," he says, before you've spoken. He always knows who's behind him. You suspect by footstep. Half the play at the Dragon Basin this morning, and they'll still want the fountains full for the promenade. And where do they think it lives, eh? Water's not courtiers. It doesn't multiply by flattery. He straightens, nods at your buckets, unlocks the cock with one of his keys, and while your buckets fill, he delivers, in the flat voice of a man reciting scripture he no longer entirely believes, the sermon you've heard pieces of a dozen times, and will hear entire before the year is out. How the fountains, all of them at once, drink more water in a day than the whole city of Paris. How even the Sun King couldn't afford it. So the fountain men invented the trick they still use, running only the fountains the king is walking toward, whistling signals ahead of the royal stroll, water leaping into life just before Majesty rounds the hedge, and dying the moment he's past. A kingdom of splendour switched on and off behind his back like a stage set. The palace drinks a river and is still thirsty, Pichon says, capping the cock. Remember that, boy, when they tell you anything here is impossible. Nothing here is impossible, it's only ruinous. Then he looks at you a moment longer than usual, the way old men do when they're deciding whether you're worth a piece of themselves, and says, "You've heard my machine sing. One day, before I'm done or she is, I'll walk you down and show her to you. Every man should once in his life see the thing that's carrying him. You will hold him to that. It will take more than a year, and by the time he keeps the promise, the world it was made in will be gone. But hold him to it you will. You carry water the rest of that afternoon, 104 steps from trough to kitchen door, the yoke biting your shoulders through the coat pad, your palms hot on the bucket ropes, and while your body does its mule work, your ears do what ears in a market town do. Gather. And what they gather, this August and into September, is a new sound underneath the town's usual sound. The town of Versailles has always talked about the court the way sailors talk about weather, endlessly, expertly, and without any illusion of controlling it. But the talk this season has changed key. The kingdom, the talk says, is out of money. Not poor harvest out of money. Out. In the middle of August, the 16th the newspapers put it, the royal treasury, for all purposes that matter, stopped paying what it owed. The state's paper is being taken at a discount even by the men who print it. The minister who presided over the emptiness has been dismissed, and in the last week of August the king recalled the one man the money-lenders and the market women trust, the Swiss banker Necker, and the town lit candles in windows for him, and someone let off fireworks by the Place d'Armes, as though a battle had been won. And this is the part the whole town repeats slowest, tasting it. The king has fixed a date. In May, next spring, for the first time in 175 years, he will summon the Estates General, deputies of the clergy, the nobility, and everyone else in France. The everyone else that includes every soul you have ever loved, to come to him and counsel him and repair the kingdom, to come here, to Versailles, to your town. The innkeepers here 1,000 deputies, plus their servants, secretaries and hangers-on lodging locally for months, and begin that very autumn, quietly raising what they will charge for a room. Rosalie hears 1,000 new mouths that dine out. Thérèse hears 1,000 lonely provincial men who will want at some point to buy a flower. Guillaume hears 1,000 commoners who will all, sooner or later, walk up to the palace and need a sword. The town, being a company town, hears it all as orders, good for trade. Everyone says it, all autumn. Whatever else it means, good for trade. Berthold hears it differently. You are in his kitchen the evening the talk reaches it, scouring, and one of the undercooks says the words good for trade, and Berthold does not look up from his ledger and says, in the voice he uses for spoiled fish, "When did hungry men ever come to a banquet to watch?" Nobody answers. The copper ticks as it cools, and that night you lie in the attic listening to the machine grinding away at the horizon, hauling the river uphill in the dark for fountains no one is awake to see, and beneath your bed the candle-sack hangs with its small soft weight, and beside you Colas mutters prices in his sleep, and somewhere below on its shelf Berthold's tourtière sits polished and empty. You are 16. Everyone you know is fed. The trouble is a sound on the horizon, a number in a newspaper. You fall asleep the way the fountains fall silent, all at once, mid-leap the moment no one is watching. Sunday comes slow and bright, one of those September Sundays that smell of cut box hedges and horse dung and roasting chestnuts all at once. And after the noon service at Saint Louis you meet Thérèse at Guillaume's trestle, with your wages burning in your pocket and your good coat brushed within an inch of its life. Guillaume looks you up and down with a professional eye. Coat, passes, shoes, he winces, forgives. Then he girds you. There is no other word. It is a ceremony. With a sword, number 23, the very hanger the fat notary wore. The brass tag turns cold against your knuckle. The sword itself is nothing, Guillaume cheerfully admits. Old, blunt as a spoon, its best days spent frightening nobody at all. It doesn't matter. The moment the weight of it settles on your left hip, something happens to your spine that you're ashamed of and delighted by in equal measure. You stand differently. You have to. The thing drags at you until you do. 6 sous, plus 2 for the hat, plus Thérèse's word of honour as deposit, which Guillaume accepts with a bow. From Mademoiselle, I take a promise against the crown jewels, and there you are, Michel of Falaise, kitchen boy of the Grande Commune, dressed in the rented outline of a gentleman, walking with your sister on your arm through the gilded gates of the Palace of Versailles, past the Swiss guards, across the same marble courtyard the King of France looks down into every morning of his life. Nobody stops you. Nobody asks your name. That is the whole miracle, and you want to sit with it a moment, because it is the strangest documented fact about the strangest palace on earth. It was open. The greatest monarchy in Christendom kept its front door unlocked. Provincials, tradesmen, foreigners, servants on their day off, anyone with a decent coat and a hired sword, wandered the state apartments daily in their hundreds. They watched the royal family walk to mass. They stood on tiptoe at the door of the council chamber. Pickpockets worked the crowds in the king's own gallery, worked them so notoriously that the guards posted warnings, and great ladies had the very watches lifted off their chains in the crush. The palace of the Sun King had, in this respect, less security than a market fair, because the theory of the place demanded it. A king of France is never private. His waking is theatre. His dinner is theatre. His palace is the stage of the world, and the world is entitled to stand in the pit. So you go in with the world, up the great staircase in a shuffling, gawking, whispering crowd of perhaps 200, and the palace closes over you. You've been inside the palace hundreds of times. You've never been inside the palace once. That is the riddle you solve on the stairs. The building you know, the brick-floored arteries, the smells of tallow and dishwater, and the building above it share walls and nothing else. You cross a single doorway and the world changes state, like water becoming air. The state apartments go through you like strong drink. Ceilings so high and so painted that the crowd walks with its mouths open, gods and clouds and chariots boiling overhead in colours you have no names for. Marble in slabs the size of bed sheets, grey-veined, wine-veined, sea-green. And then the gallery, the hall of mirrors, the room even your grandmother had heard of. 240 feet of it, a wall of 17 arched windows blazing with garden light, faced by 17 arches of mirror. Mirror, the most expensive surface a wall can wear, in panels by the 100, so that the gardens pour in on one side and pour back, doubled, from the other, and the whole room swims. Gilded trophies, chandeliers hanging like frozen fireworks. On great nights, they say, 3,000 candles burn in this one room, and the mirrors take the 3,000 and make of them an uncountable republic of flames. You look at the chandeliers and think, you cannot help it. It is who you have become that somebody holds the right to every one of those candle ends, and that it is not you, and that whoever it is rich. But here is what you want people to know about the glory of Versailles, the part the engravings never show. In the very shadow of that gallery, 2 turns and 1 modest door away, the crowd thins, the marble goes plain, and the smell begins. Because 2,300 rooms were built for the seeing of a king, and almost none in the beginning for the relieving of 10,000 human bodies a day. There are the famous English-style conveniences in a few blessed apartments now, and close stools by the 100 for those with rank and rooms. But for the crowds, the visitors, the soldiers, the porters, the numberless servants, there are dark stairs. There are corridor ends. There are courtyards. Everyone in this palace knows which corners have surrendered. Great ladies walking to the chapel hold nosegays to their faces along certain passages, flowers your own sister may have sold at the gate that morning. And the ammonia reek of the world's most magnificent building simply is, the way weather is, complained about in memoranda for 100 years and never solved. Versailles is not a gentle place. It is only a polished one. Gold leaf above, a smell of the stable below, and the two have lived together so long that neither notices the other. Thérèse takes it all differently than you do. Of course she does. You watch the ceilings, she watches the people. She reads the crowd like a market. Which provincial wife's silk is new? Which chevalier's cuffs are turned? Which strolling abbé is listening to which conversation? Halfway down the hall of mirrors, her hand tightens on your arm and she nods, minutely, at a thin man drifting through the crowd with a face of perfect boredom. Watch the boredom, she murmurs. Bored eyes, busy hands. And not 5 minutes later there is a small commotion behind you. A Norman accent, ironically, rising in outrage. A watch, gone off its chain, in the king's own gallery, in the sight of 17 mirrors. The thin man is nowhere. The guards shrug the shrug of men who post the warnings for a reason. Even the wildlife at Versailles wear the decent coat. At the hour, the tide of the crowd turns and carries you with it, along the gallery through the war-painted drawing-room at its end, to the doors of the Queen's antechamber, where the press tightens until you can feel the breathing of strangers on your neck and the ushers in their blue liveries begin arranging the flood into a horseshoe of humanity around an empty table. Because this is what everyone came for. This is the grand couvert. The King and Queen of France are about to eat their dinner, and you and your sister and a notary from Anjou and a wool merchant's widow and 200 perfect strangers are going to stand and watch them do it, openly, lawfully, as entertainment. The table sits like an altar, white cloth, gold plate, a fortress of covered dishes. The royal family enters, and the room drops into a hush so total you can hear silk settling. And they sit, and the machinery begins. Dishes uncovered in sequence by officers whose whole lives are this sequence. Wine poured through a small solemn relay of hands, tasted, offered. 40 dishes offered to a man who will touch 6. And around the altar, the standing wall of subjects, shuffling gently forward rank by rank as ushers keep the current moving, everyone straining for their minute at the front. Your minute comes, and here is what you see, and you will tell it for the rest of your life to anyone who asks what the king was like, because it is the truth, and the truth is stranger than any pamphlet. You see a heavy, mild, nearsighted man in his mid-30s, eating with tremendous, unhurried, entirely unroyal appetite. No crown, a coat, a fine one, but a coat. He addresses his dinner the way Fournier addresses the oven, seriously, competently, without conversation. The Queen beside him barely touches anything. She draws her gloves off and on, speaks a word to her neighbour, sends dishes away untasted, and every dish she sends away, some watcher in the horseshoe follows with their eyes, doing in their heads the arithmetic you do in yours. Where does it go now? You know where it goes. It goes to the Cerdo. Some of that gold-plated refusal will be on Rosalie's stall by Tuesday, and a chandler's wife will eat it. The little royal children you had hoped to see are not at table. A lady near you whispers that the little Dauphin is ill again, has been ill all summer, poor mate, and crosses herself. The man beside you, shopkeeper by his hands, watches the king chew and breathes in pure satisfaction. He eats well, our man. Not mockery, approval, the deep old peasant approval of appetite. The same words your grandmother used about a son-in-law. Our man. That is how France watches its king eat in the autumn of 1788. Pressed close, uninvited and entitled, half in worship, half in appraisal. Exactly the way a village watches its strongest farmer, proud of him, dependent on him, and keeping, without knowing it, accounts. Afterward, going down the great staircase into the slanting evening, Thérèse is quiet for 11 steps. You count them. Then she says, in the voice she uses for adding sums, all those dishes for 2 people, and the boy who bakes their servant's bread standing in a rented sword to watch. A step. It's not the eating, Michel. Kings have always eaten. It's that they let us in to see. They want us to see. Another step. I can't decide if that's the strongest thing I've ever seen or the weakest. You hand the sword back to Guillaume at the gate in the last of the light. He checks the tag 23 against his book, satisfied, then reads something in your face and pauses, one thumb polishing the brass. First grand couvert, he asks. You nod. I watched the old king eat once, Louis XV, 40 years ago, further back than that even, when this sword had a working edge, and so did I. He hangs number 23 back on its rack among its brothers, squaring it carefully, an old soldier dressing his line. The dinner never changes, boy, only the appetite of the ones watching. Lately, he squints up at the palace, gold lit, immense. Lately the watchers come hungrier. He waves off your sou for the hat. Keep it. Buy your sister a chestnut. And you walk Therese home through the blue evening past lit windows and cookshop steam, 2 servants' children full of a day of borrowed splendour, while behind you the palace lights its uncountable candles for the night, every single one of them, already somebody's inheritance. That autumn, October-November 1788, the town fills the way a mill pond fills, slow and certain. The word is out across France. The estates will meet at Versailles in May. Already the early birds arrive. Pamphleteers, printers' agents, speculating lawyers, men with projects, and every one of them needs a bed, a laundress, a dinner, and news. Rents in town tick upward. Rosalie extends her stall by 1 plank. Therese raises Sunday flowers from 3 sous to 4 and is paid without a blink. And in the bakehouse ledger, flour climbs, steady, pitiless, a sou at a time, and now everyone knows it isn't stopping because the granaries of the north are holding air. Bread in the Paris markets passes 10 sous, then 11, then 12. Fournier stops reading the accounts aloud. The palace's answer to the gathering dark is the one answer it knows: light. The season's entertainments proceed. Card evenings blaze. And your candle sack, you can hardly credit it, swells with the tag ends of tag ends, and the chandler in the Rue de la Paroisse pays you 11 sous the pound now for wax. Because wax follows flour, because everything follows flour, and one November evening you weigh the sack at just over 19 pounds, and do the arithmetic 3 times because you don't believe it. More than 9 livres, sleeping under your bed in the shape of dead flames. A month of a labourer's wages, gathered stub by stub off the floors of glory. Sell it, Colas advises from the dark when you tell him. Winter's coming. Prices are a wave, Norman. The whole art is knowing when your wave is highest. And you know. A silence in which you can hear him grinning. The chalk knows. Something's wrong this year. The marks are wrong. Tables ordering short. Great names gone to their estates early. When the top of the ladder tightens its belt in October, the bed creaks. His voice goes, for the first time you can remember, quiet. By February the bottom bleeds. Sell at Christmas, not before, not after. And Michel, keep your sister's stocking money in 2 places, not 1. You lie awake a long time after that, listening to the machine grind at the horizon. You take half his advice. Remember which half. The winter of 1788 into 1789 is the winter they will talk about for 100 years. It comes down out of the north at the end of November like a lid closing on a pot, and it does not lift for 2 months. Not a cold snap. An occupation. By Christmas the frost has driven a fist into everything. The ground rings like iron under your wooden soles. The water in the attic jug is a solid white stone by morning, and you and Colas and the 2 other boys sleep in your clothes, in your coats, under both blankets and the spare aprons, stacked together like loaves for the shared warmth, and still you wake with your breath frozen into the wool at your chin. The Seine freezes at Paris, freezes solid, bank to bank, so that carts cross on the ice. The Grand Canal in the King's Own Garden freezes into a 2-mile cross of white, and the skaters come out, courtiers and clerks together, scoring loops on the King's water, while their servants stamp and smoke on the bank. And one night in December you notice something wrong with the world and cannot name it, and lie there in the dark with your heart tapping. until Colus's voice comes muffled out of the blankets. The machine has stopped. The river that carries it has locked it in ice. And for the first time in your 2 years, for the first time, old men say, in longer than that, the horizon has fallen silent. You had no idea how deep that grinding had settled into your bones until it quit. The silence is enormous. It's like lying beside someone and realizing they've stopped breathing. All winter the fountains stand dry-throated, the reservoirs dropping foot by foot, and Pichon prowls his frozen empire wrapped in 3 coats, tapping pipes with a mallet, listening for the crack of ice inside led the way. A surgeon listens for a broken bone. She'll turn again, he says, when you find him at it, his breath smoking. The river always lets go in the end. Then, quieter, with a nod up at the palace, its windows grey with cold. Rivers let go. I'm less sure about winters like this one. This one's the kind that gets remembered wrong. They'll say the cold made the anger, boy. Backwards. The cold just froze off everything that was hiding it. Because here is what the beautiful skating print winter is doing out beyond the ice. It is finishing what July's hail began. Everything stops. River mills locked in ice cannot grind flour. Barges cannot move grain. Building sites stand dead, workshops shut, and in Paris, 12 miles away, a day's walk that has never felt shorter, tens of thousands of labourers are idle in the deadliest cold of the century, with bread at 13 sous and climbing. By February it stands at 14.5 in the Paris markets, 14.5 sous for the £4 loaf, in a city where a porter earns 20 a day, and earns nothing when the river is his employer, and the river is ice. Half a day's wage for a family's bread for the ones who still have the wage. You know it the way a kitchen knows things, through supply doors, the carters' faces, the way the flour sacks come in lighter and cost dearer. The new lock on the bakehouse store, and the way Fournier, who has never in your time counted loaves after baking, counts loaves after baking. The parishes and the palace do what the old order does in a hard winter, and to be fair, the Channel is always fair. It is not nothing. Wood is given out. The king and queen give heavily and publicly. In Paris, the poor build obelisks of snow in the streets in the king's honour, thanking him in verses for firewood, real documented obelisks of snow, with poems on them in the winter of 1789. The town of Versailles feeds its own at church doors, and Rosalie's stall that winter quietly becomes something between a business and a mission. The leavings sell at half price after dark, and there is a pot at the stall's end that is never empty and never spoken of. Ye catch her ladling it out one iron evening to a roof-mender's family, all 5 of them silent with cold, and when she sees you seeing her, she scowls like a woman caught at crime. "Bookkeeping," she snaps. "A dead customer never buys again. Move your feet. You're blocking trade." At Christmas you sell the candle sack, 12 sous the pound, the chandler grumbling exactly as much as Colus predicted to the day. The waves crest, £19.5, 11 livres are 10 sous, the most money you've ever held, a warm, dirty, rustling weight of coin that makes you feel, for one afternoon, dangerous. You take Colas' other advice too. Half goes into Thérèse's stocking. The other half you sew, she sews, your stitches would shame a crow, into the hem of the blue-grey coat itself, so that from that day on your one bit of pride is also secretly your bank, and hangs a little heavier on your shoulders, which you find you do not mind. A man who carries his whole fortune feels its weight. That is not a burden. That is company. and the empty sack goes back on its nail and begins to fill again, stub by stub, because the palace answers the darkest winter in memory, the way it answers everything, the only way it knows. It lights the candles. The season's card evenings blaze on. The mirrors multiply the flames, and the tag ends of the tag ends drift down the ladder into a Norman boy's linen sack, the way snow drifts, one weightless nothing at a time, until the weight is real. In February, Pichon keeps half his promise early. He finds you hauling wood in the fountain court, looks at you the way he looked at the standpipe, and says only, "Leave that. Bring your breath." And he takes you in through a door you've never used, up a stair that is scarcely a stair, a ladder with ambitions, through lofts where the cold has teeth, and out a hatch onto the roof of the Palace of Versailles. The roofs up here are a country of their own, lead plains, slate slopes, forests of chimneys, hundreds of chimneys, every one of them a household below, every thread of smoke a fire somebody tends. Pichon's kingdom sits among them, the great reservoirs under the roof line that feed the palace's pipes, iced over now, grey glass under a grey sky. He checks his levels. You look at France, because you can see all of it from here. That is not a manner of speaking. It is design, the whole thumping heart of the design. And standing on the lead with your eyes watering in the wind, you understand this place at last the way you could never understand it from the bakehouse. The three great avenues come to your feet like the spokes of a wheel, and the wheel's hub is the room below you where a heavy, mild man is at this hour being handed his shirt by the highest-ranking person in the room, because that is the law. The town lies in its ordered squares. You find the market, the Rue de la Paroisse, the speck of canvas that is a stall where your sister will be blowing on her fingers. Beyond it, white country, iron country, villages smoking thinly, the roads like veins, and away, north, the silent notch in the hills where the machine stands frozen in its river. The gardens behind you run to the horizon in perfect white geometry, 100 fountains stopped mid-word, the canals cross glittering with distant skaters small as pepper grains, 500,000 candle flames, one winter's arithmetic, a kingdom of rights and leavings, all of it arranged in perfect avenues around one man's breakfast. Every man should see the thing that's carrying him, Pichon says at your shoulder, watching his frozen water. Well, there she is, the whole apparatus. He blows on his hands, workmanlike, unawed. 60 years will wear the ore off anything. You're a cog in it, boy, about the size of a flea's tooth, so am I. But mark this, and he stamps once on the lead, gently, as a man knocks on a neighbour's door. Cogs are the only part a machine truly cannot spare. Gilding, it can lose. It has before. You look down the Avenue de Paris, straight as a sword blade, pointing at the frozen city you cannot see, where the bread is 14.5 sous. You're a flea's tooth, but you're here, you're part of it. You climb down with your ears burning from the wind, and go back to the woodpile, and the winter goes on and cracks, the river's ice first, in the thaw at winter's end, so that one March night the horizon clears its throat, groans, and takes up its old grinding song again, and you sleep that night better than you have since Christmas, which you will remember later with something like shame, because the river was not the only thing the winter had loaded past bearing, and the other things, when the thaw came, did not resume their old song. They found a new one. Spring comes to Versailles in 1789 like an audience filing into a theatre. Through March and April, the town fills past anything the innkeepers dreamed when they raised their prices in the autumn. And they raised them again, and it made no difference. The beds are taken. The deputies are arriving. From every province of France, more than 1,000 of them summoned, and with them come the secretaries, the servants, the wives who wouldn't be left. The printers who follow debate the way gulls follow a plough, the sellers of everything sellable. Grave lawyers from Brittany with trunks full of grievance lists share landing with Provençal abbés. The tennis courts and dance halls of the town are eyed up for rented lodgings. You hear accents in the market you cannot even place, and Thérèse, who by mid-April has hired a second basket and a girl named after some southern saint to carry it, comes home hoarse from talking and richer every week, good for trade. It is in fact exactly what the town ordered, good for trade. But the deputies bring something else in their trunks, and it spills. They bring the cahiers, the grievance books, all winter, all over France, in the same iron cold that froze the machine. Parishes and guilds sat down and wrote out at the king's own invitation everything that was wrong with their lives. Your own village will have written one. You find you can recite it without seeing it, because it is written on your family's bones. The salt tax, the milling dues, the pigeons of the seigneur eating the seed corn, the year of the bad bread. Thousands of these books converging on your town in saddlebags. The whole complaint of a kingdom, cross-referenced, and every man carrying one absolutely certain that the king, once he truly hears, will mend it. That is the mood, and I want to be precise about it, because it is one of the strangest moods in history, and the pamphlet writers of later years will paint it out of the picture. Hope. Enormous, painful, national hope. Almost no one in that town that spring, not the deputies, not the market, not you, is dreaming of a world without the king. They are dreaming with a fervour that is almost religious, of finally being introduced to him. Though the spring has a floor under it, and the floor is the price of bread, and the floor is giving way. 14 sous and a half, and holding there like a fever that will not break into the season when last year's grain runs thinnest. And at the end of April from Paris comes a sound the town has not heard in living memory. In the Faubourg Saint-Antoine on the 28th, a wallpaper manufacturer named Réveillon is reported, falsely as it happens, but famine has no patience for corrections, to have said a workman could live on 15 sous a day. Crowds burn his factory and his house to the shells. These soldiers fire. The dead are counted in dozens. The Faubourg says hundreds. The carters bring the story out to Versailles with the flour, and the town handles it gingerly. The way you handle a pan you suspect is hot. Bad. Yes. Terrible. Yes. But Paris, you know. Paris. And anyway, the estates open Monday, and then at last everything will be taken in hand. Monday, the 4th of May, 1789. Your town's greatest day. You will keep till you die an old man's absolute conviction that there was never such a spectacle, and the books will bear you out. The whole royal apparatus and the whole nation's answer to it walked in one procession through the streets of Versailles. Your streets, the streets where you haul water from Notre Dame to Saint Louis, to hear the mass that opens the Estates General. The town is one packed shout of humanity from before dawn. Every window along the route is rented out at prices that make Guillot whistle. Tapestries hang from sills. The guilds line the way with torches, and Thérèse sells out both baskets by 8 in the morning and simply stands on her stool to watch, gripping your shoulder for balance, and neither of you says a word for 2 hours. Everything walks past you. the clergy in a river of grey and violet, the nobility like a broken open jewel box, plumed hats, cloth of gold, the blood of the Crusades taking small ceremonial steps in heeled shoes, the king walking heavily and bowing to the shouts, and the shouts for him are a physical force, a wall of vive le roi that you feel in your sternum. The queen, glittering and grey-faced, to something much quieter. A few cries, some of them kind, and pressing all along the route that other thing, the thing everyone has come to see, walking plain as a fence in a garden of peacocks. 600 deputies of the Third Estate, in plain black cloth and white cravats, lawyers and merchants and farmers, dressed by regulation like a clergy of the ordinary. Their appointed costume is a humiliation. That is precisely its design, rank stamped onto wool. And they have turned it inside out by sheer number and gravity, and the crowd roars for the black coats, roars until the windows buzz, and you, wedged at a corner with your sister's hand on your shoulder, do the thing the whole channel exists for. You look at the small human details inside the pageant. The nearsighted deputy who has clearly never worn a dress sword and keeps catching it on his own leg. A rented sword, you'd swear it. You know the drag of one. Somewhere in the crowd, Guillaume is beaming like a father. The row of market women in their best who fall silent as the queen passes and then, unrebuked, cheer the black-coated commons twice as loud, and the practised way her officers do not hear it. The heavy man near you who lifts his little daughter and says, not to her, to himself, now they'll see us. Now it all comes right. Now they'll see us. Hold that sentence. All of what is coming is folded up inside it like a knife in a napkin. The estates open next day in the Menu Plaisir, the king's warehouse of festivities, of all buildings, where the scenery and machines of royal spectacle are stored, hastily fitted with a great hall. The town finds the choice apt and makes jokes about it, and then, almost at once, the great pageant runs aground on a word, and the word is verify, and beneath the word is everything, whether the three estates are three bodies or one nation. Weeks pass. The black coats will not constitute themselves separately. The privileged orders will not merge. The hall generates speeches the way the bakehouse generates heat, and the town of Versailles, which had expected drama, gets procedure, and discovers to its own surprise that it cannot look away. Printed debates sell at the market like fish. Rosalie's customers argue precedents of 1614 over the king's own leftovers. You are 16, you cannot follow half of it, and you find you carry the other half around all day like a stone in your shoe. And in the middle of those weeks, on the 4th of June, the palace above you goes silent in the old way, the oldest way of all. The little Dauphin, the boy whose illness a stranger whispered to you at the Grand Couvert, 7 years old, twisted and wasted for a year by the disease of the spine, dies at Meudon. The bells of your church toll for him, the same bells that woke you at 5 for 2 years. The queen you watched send away gold dishes untasted has lost her eldest son in the very weeks the world is shouting outside her windows. The court withdraws into mourning. The estates, needing the king, press on him even so, and he is heard to say, the phrase runs through the town in a day and the record keeps it, are there no fathers among them? The town, which is quarrelling with his whole world, weeps for him without the least sense of contradiction. You light 2 of your own candle stubs at St. Louis, 1 from each of you, Therese's sou and yours. You never tell Cola, who would calculate their resale. Then June quickens past anyone's holding. On the 17th, the black coats stop asking to be counted and count themselves. They declare that they, joined by whoever will come, are the National Assembly, the nation assembled. You hear it at the market at noon, and the phrase will not sit still in your head. It is too big, like a word for a colour you haven't seen. 3 days later, on the 20th, comes the morning that history will paint 1,000 times, and you are, by the pure blind luck of an errand, a crate of lettuces for the common tables, in the street to see its edges. The deputies arrive at their hall to find the doors shut, guards posted. Closed, they are told, for preparations for a royal session. It is raining, the flat grey insistence of June rain. 600 of the most consequential men in France stand locked out in it, water running off their black hats, while messengers scurry, and the crowd thickens around them with that low hum a crowd makes when it cannot decide between laughing and breaking something. And then the word moves through the wet street the way fire moves through thatch. A place found this way, messieurs, and the black coats walk, half-running, undignified, magnificent, 3 streets from the palace gate to the big, bare royal tennis court in the Rue du Vieux Versailles. A plain high box of a hall you've walked past 100 times, netting and lattice and nothing else. They pour into it. The crowd pours after them, packs the gallery, hangs off the lattice. You are pressed in a doorway across the lane with your lettuces going warm, and you cannot hear the words. Almost no one in the street can hear the words. But you hear the thing itself. A hall's worth of grown men swearing all together, one huge ragged wave of voices, and then the roar. They have sworn, the crowd tells itself, relaying it head to head like a bucket chain, never to separate, to meet anywhere the ground will hold them, until France has a constitution. An oath in a tennis court, in your town, 3 streets from where you bake the servants' bread, wherever the ground will hold them, the king's own ground holding them. The roar from that plain box rolls out over the wet slates of Versailles, and you stand in your doorway hugging a crate of lettuce to your chest like a man clinging to the last piece of a very orderly world, and you actually think in these words, and you will laugh at yourself about it later, and then stop laughing. Somebody should tell the kitchens how many there'll be for dinner. The summer that follows moves like the bakehouse oven, slow to heat and then impossible to touch. The king commands, the assembly declines to be commanded, and within the week the king, and this is the sentence that would have gotten a man laughed out of any tavern in France a year ago, gives way, and orders the nobility and clergy to sit with the commons in one body. The town celebrates with illuminations, candles in every window down the Rue de la Paroisse. Thérèse sells flowers to strangers to throw at deputies' lodgings. Guillot's sword rack stands empty a full afternoon, every hanger out on hire, 26 gentlemen for a day promenading past the gates at once. And then, at the end of June and into July, the town's other trade begins. Soldiers. They come in by regiment, royal troops, and above all the foreign regiments in French service, German cavalry, Swiss infantry, camping in the orangerie at Saint-Cloud, on the Champ de Mars at Paris, until there are tens of thousands ringing the capital and your town both, and every man in the market can read the board as well as any minister. You do not gather that much iron around a talking hall unless someone is thinking of ending the talk. The soldiers buy bread, wine, ribbons and flowers. Trade is trade. But the town serves them with the face a tavern keeps for a customer who is drinking himself toward a fight. On the 11th of July, the king dismisses Necker, the one minister the markets trust, sent away quiet as a discharged footman, And on the 14th, 12 miles down the avenue, Paris answers. You are stacking wood when the news comes, and you will always remember that. The sheer domestic ordinariness of the moment the world changed. A horse ridden half to death in the Cour Royale. Then another, runners, doors, and the word moving across the town like a gust across a wheat field, bending every head in turn. The people of Paris have stormed the Bastille, taken the governor's fortress with its 8 towers, seized the muskets of the Invalides, cut the garrison down, carried the governor's head through the streets on a pike. The Paris mob. No, stop, this is the day that word dies. The people of Paris, armed, organised under a new tricolour cockade, and in possession of the second largest city on earth. They will tell a story in the years after about that night. How a duke woke the king to tell him, and the king said, "But that is a revolt." And the duke answered, "No, sire, it is a revolution." Whether those exact words were said in that exact dark, no one can prove. The man who told the story was the duke. I give it to you as the age gave it to itself. Too perfect to be sworn to, too true to leave out. What is beyond argument is what your own eyes begin to see within the week, from the service courts of the Grand Commune, and what it does to your town. The court cracks first at the top. The king's youngest brother, the Comte d'Artois, the most hated man at Versailles, the market will tell you frankly, is gone within 2 nights, over the border with his household, and after him, in closed carriages rolling out at strange hours, a procession that does not stop. The great names, the Polignacs, the holders of offices whose incomes you cannot pronounce, the employers of the ladies' maids and cooks and grooms and hairdressers who drink in the same rooms your fellow servants drink in. Emigration, the new word. Every emptied apartment upstairs is a dozen wages ended downstairs, a tailor unpaid, a wood order cancelled, a laundress short. When the top of the ladder tightens its belt, Colas said, in the dark, a lifetime ago last October the bottom bleeds. The king goes to Paris, the 17th of July, 3 days after the fortress fell, with no escort to speak of, into a city bristling with 100,000 new muskets, and comes back alive with a tricolour cockade pinned to his hat by the hands of the Parisians, and the town of Versailles lets out a breath it had been holding for a week. And through August the world turns over so fast the almanac cannot hold it. In one August night the Assembly, in a kind of patriotic delirium, abolishes in hours the whole ancient lattice of privileges, feudal dues, seigneurial courts, the sale of offices, exemptions, the pigeons in the seed corn, the very grammar of the world your village's grievance book was written in. You hear grown men read the decrees aloud at Rosalie's stall, and weep into the king's leftovers. Then a declaration. Born free, equal in rights. Words with no precedent in any register of the king's household, where every soup has a rank. You're a servant in the oldest household in Europe, and you serve out that August with the strangest feeling under your apron. The feeling of standing in a building whose deeds are being rewritten while you sweep its floors. But the harvest is in now, and here is the cruelty of 1789, the fact that decides everything after. The harvest is good, and it does not matter. The grain must be cut, threshed, milled, moved, and the country's confidence is broken. Grain hoarded, convoys stopped by frightened villages, mills behindhand, and through September, with a good harvest standing in the stooks, bread in Paris is scarcer than in the famine spring, not only dear now, absent. Bakers' doors at 3 in the morning have queues like processions, and the queues are women, because the bread queue is women's work, and the women of the Paris markets, the fishwives, the fruit sellers, the porters' wives, a corporation older and prouder than most dukedoms, with ancient ceremonial rights to speak to the king himself on great occasions. The women are reaching the end of a very long rope. In Versailles you feel it as a tightening, your own town's bakers short, Rosalie's basket prices doubling, Fournier counting loaves twice, and down the avenue a sound you cannot hear but can somehow feel through the ground, like the machines grinding but made of voices, saying one word, bread, bread, bread. And the Assembly's radicals and the Paris papers have begun saying, louder each week, the thing that once was unsayable. The king should live in Paris, among his people, not out there, out here, in that palace, behind that ring of foreign soldiers, in that town of servants. The baker should live over his shop. Into precisely this dry tinder September, the court brings up one more regiment for its protection. The regiment of Flanders, 1,000 men marching into your town with drums on the 23rd, needing lodging, bread, and welcome. And the king's bodyguard, by old military courtesy, resolves to give the newcomers a welcome dinner. They book the finest room available. They book the opera house inside the palace on the 1st of October, and the kitchens of Versailles, which is to say, among 100 others you, are ordered to help serve it. You will be asked about that night for the rest of your life, and you will always answer with the same care because you were there, and being there is precisely why you refuse to embroider it. You carried dishes to the stage door and in along the corridor 3 hours, your arms dead by the second, and what you saw through the wings, in glimpses between trays, was a banquet. The boxes full of watching ladies, the table laid down the stage of the most beautiful theatre in France, 200 officers, the king's musicians playing, toast after toast rolling up the tears like surf. You saw the royal family appear, unannounced, to a storm of drawn swords and shouted loyalty that shook dust from the machinery above the stage. You saw the Queen carry the little Dauphin, the new Dauphin, 4 years old, along the table on her arm, and 200 soldiers' faces go soft and fierce at once, and you understood, watching from the dark with a sauce-boat in each hand, that you were watching the old world make love to the old world, that this ecstasy of loyalty in a starving October was itself the news, and that it would read very differently by lamplight in Paris. It did. Within 2 days the Paris papers had the banquet as an orgy of counter-revolution. The tricolour cockade they printed trampled under officers' heels, white cockades of the old royalism pinned on by the ladies' own hands, the nation insulted at the king's table while the city queued for bread. Now the channels rule, and I hold to it here where it matters most. What I can tell you as documented fact is that the banquet happened the 1st of October, 1789, Opera House of Versailles, that the loyal frenzy and the white ribbons in some hands are attested by people who were in the room, and that the trampling of the tricolour rests on hostile report. Men who were there swore it never happened. Men who hated the court swore it did, and no account survives from anyone with clean hands. You were, a boy with a sauce-boat 40 feet away, behind scenery. You saw rapture. You did not see heels on a cockade. I will always tell you which is which. It scarcely mattered. Paris believed it. Paris was hungry, and the story of the trampled cockade went through the spread queues like fever through a ward, and it arrived in exactly the place where the rope had run out, the market women. On the morning of the 5th of October, 1789, it begins to rain. A cold, grey, streaming autumn rain, the kind that soaks a wool coat in an hour, and somewhere down the avenue, under that rain, Paris starts walking toward you. The news outruns the marchers by hours, the way news always does, and it arrives wrong and gets righter all day, which is worse. A rider at noon. The women of the Paris markets have risen, seized the bells and the Hôtel de Ville, and are marching on Versailles to demand bread of the king. A carter at 1. Not hundreds of women, thousands. 6, 7,000. The fishwives and fruit sellers leading, with kitchen skewers and pikes, and 2 cannon they have dragged out and hitched like hand-carts, walking 12 miles in beating rain. At 3, behind them, hours behind, come the National Guard of Paris, 20,000 men under Lafayette, who by every account was ordered forward by his own soldiers rather than the reverse. The town does not riot and does not cheer. The town does what a company town does when the customer's quarrel comes to the shop. It closes its shutters and puts on its plainest face. You're sent with half the boys to help carry stores in from the outbuildings. The palace gates, those gates that have stood open your whole 2 years, open as a proverb, open as the king's own theory of himself, are swung shut and chained. You stand in the rain in the Cour Royale for 1 minute watching them do it, iron gate after iron gate, and of everything you will see in these 2 days, this is the sight that hollows your stomach. Versailles has locked its front door. The theory is over. Thérèse comes to the service gate at 4, streaming empty-handed. No one buys flowers in the rain before a battle. And you have one short, fierce argument through the wicket which she wins, as she has won every argument of your joint lives by simply stating what she is going to do. She will watch from Versailles, with the shutters barred, and you will stay inside your stone barracks, and neither of you will do anything brave. Bravery is for people with property, she says, rain running off her chin. We're not rich enough yet, swear. You swear. She's gone into the grey. They come up the Avenue de Paris at dusk. You watch from the 3rd-floor windows of the Grand Commune, a dozen boys and cooks pressed to each casement. Nobody talking. You hear them long before you see them. That sound you had felt through the ground all September, made real at last. Thousands of voices, hoarse, rhythmic, ragged with 12 wet miles. And the word is the word everyone said it would be. Bread. Du pain. And then out of the rain haze the head of the column resolves, and it is women. Rank on rank on rank of soaked women. Market women arm in arm with well-dressed women pulled from doorsteps as they passed. Women with skirts kilted up out of the mud. Women carrying skewers and scythe blades and market knives and umbrellas. Women hauling on the traces of a cannon with their hair down their backs like drowned rope. They flood into the Place d'Armes below the locked gates, the square where your sister sells flowers to sweethearts. And their torches hiss in the rain, and their voices slap off the palace face and come back doubled, the way everything in this place is doubled. And behind the middle window of the 2nd floor of the Grand Commune, a 16-year-old baker of servant's bread stands very still with his palms flat against his thighs, and watches 10,000 years of who stands where dissolve in front of him like sugar in water. A deputation is admitted. This you learn within the hour because the service wings pass news faster than any gallery. A handful of the women taken in to the king himself. And the king, it is the purest Louis of all the stories you will ever hear of him, receives the wet, shaking market women kindly, is visibly stricken by them, promises bread, orders the stores opened, and within the evening has the palace's own supplies started toward the crowd, and signs at last his acceptance of the Assembly's great august decrees. One of the girls of the deputation, they say, 17 years old, faints in front of him and is revived with wine by royal hands. Every kitchen in the Grand Commune repeats it, half mocking, half not. He was kind to her. Of course he was. That was never the question. The night is the worst of it, and the night is mostly sound. The crowd cannot go home. 12 miles dark, the rain unending. So 7,000 exhausted strangers bivouac in your town, in the churches, under the market roofs, in doorways, around fires that will not stay lit, in the riding hall of the Assembly itself, where soaked women pack the benches among the deputies and dry their skirts at the Speaker's brazier, while debate stumbles on around them. Toward midnight comes Lafayette with his 20,000, drums slow with fatigue, and the town fills past any counting, and you lie in your clothes in the attic dark with Colas silent beside you. Colas, silent, listening to a hum like a hive settling, shots now and then, far off, aimless, each one snapping every spine awake, the machine grinding away obliviously on the horizon underneath it all. Somewhere out there in the packed wet dark are guards' patrols, guardsmen's tempers, 7,000 grievances and no plan at all. You do not sleep and do not pray exactly. You inventory, sister, behind Rosalie's shutters, coat with the coins in the hem on your body, candle sack nailed fast, knife in your pocket. It is not courage, but it is a way of holding your own hand. What happens at dawn happens in 20 minutes, and you see none of it, and hear all of it, and I will tell it as the inquiries later established it, because on this of all mornings the channel does not decorate. At first light a crowd finds a gate, the little grille by the chapel courtyard left somehow unbarred, and is inside before anyone in authority knows it. They surge up the Queen's staircase. 2 of the King's bodyguards standing their post at her doors are overwhelmed. Both die there, and their heads are taken. A guardsman's shout buys the Queen the minute she needs to fly, barefoot, half-dressed, through the little private door to the King's rooms. The door holds, this once, this last time, and then Lafayette's soldiers pour in and drive the invaders out, and it is over. 2 guardsmen, and among the crowd its own dead from scattered fire. By the arithmetic of the year it is a small butchery. Standing in the bakehouse doorway, hearing the roar of it roll around the marble courts, you had been sent for the morning loaves. The loaves got baked. The loaves always get baked. You learn that there is no such thing as a small butchery when you can hear it. Then, the strangest hour of your life. The roaring courtyard, packed to the railings, calls for the King, and he comes out onto the balcony, and the roar turns to cheering. Calls for the Queen, and she comes out, alone with her 2 children, then motions the children back and stands alone, hands crossed on her breast, above a crowd bristling with the same iron that entered her bedchamber an hour before. And the crowd, which does not forgive her and never will, roars its rough, astonished approval of sheer nerve. You see this. This part you see, wedged at the corner of the Cour Royale among the packed thousands, small as a flea's tooth in the machine of history. The tiny brilliant figures on the balcony, the forest of pikes, Lafayette's theatrical bow, and then the cry that decides the next 4 years, one throat first, then hundreds, then all of them, half command, half invitation, wholly irresistible. A Paris, and the King. You are watching the balcony. You will swear all your life you saw his shoulders settle a half inch. This settling of a man picking up a yoke agrees. They leave at 1:30 that afternoon. It takes 7 hours to go the 12 miles, a procession such as the world had never seen, and please God never will again. The royal carriage, the family inside it, moving at walking pace in a river of 60,000 souls, the National Guard, the market women riding astride cannon with poplar branches in their hands, wagons of flour from the palace stores rumbling along like the point of the whole argument made visible. And around the coach, mile after mile, the women singing, cheerful now, terribly cheerful, the day's dead an hour behind them. The couplet the whole world remembers, the couplet that says what this year was about more plainly than every pamphlet ever printed. We are bringing back the baker, the baker's wife, and the baker's little boy. The baker, the man who owns the flour. You stand at the mouth of the Avenue de Paris with your sister's hand crushed in yours. She found you, she will always find you. And watch the roof of the carriage diminish down that dead straight road in the rain-washed light, one bright box on a dark tide until the avenue swallows it. And behind you, up the slope, stands the Palace of Versailles, with its gates hanging open and its courts full of trampled mud and dropped cockades, and nobody, this is the fact you will carry longest, absolutely nobody, from the Swiss at the gate to the minister packing his boxes, has thought to tell the 10,000 people who serve it what happens now. The King of France has gone to live over his shop, and the greatest household on earth stands in the rain outside its own doors, holding its buckets and its ladles and its brooms out of a job it thought was eternal. The first thing to go is the noise. You do not notice for 2 days, because for 2 days there is the noise of aftermath. The courts to be cleaned, the mud shovelled, the broken grille rehung on its hinges as carefully as if it mattered now, wagons loading linen and plate and dispatch boxes for Paris in an unending line. But on the third morning you cross the Rue de la Surintendance at 5 with the bread, and you stop in the middle of the street, and you stand there like a simpleton in the dark because you can hear your own wooden soles on the cobbles, one pair of shoes echoing. In 2 years you have never once heard Versailles quiet enough to echo. The bells still ring, the machine still grinds on the horizon, hauling its river uphill for no one. But the town's great underlying hum, 10,000 servants, 2,000 horses, the wheels, the deliveries, the drills, the errands, the whole circulatory roar of the machine you lived inside so long you mistook it for silence. The hum is gone. What is left is a very large, very beautiful town on a hill holding its breath. They keep the palace, of course. That surprises people now, but it is the sober, documented truth. Nobody burns it, nobody sacks it. The nation inherits it the way a family inherits a bedridden aunt. Respectfully, expensively, with no idea what to do with her. A skeleton of the household is kept on wages to maintain what cannot be allowed to rot. Fires against the damp, furniture under sheets, gardeners enough to keep the hedges from going feral, fountain men to keep the pipes from bursting with the first hard frost, and kitchens, small ones, a stub of the old glory, because caretakers must eat, and clerks must eat, and the endless inventory men the assembly sends must eat. The palace is still hungry, just barely, the way a convalescent is hungry. Berthaud, who could have his pick of the great private kitchens of Paris, half the cooks of the household are already gone there, following the money as cooks have followed money since Babylon, chooses, to nobody's surprise who knows him, to stay. He's kept on to run what cooking remains, with a staff cut from dozens to a handful, and he keeps you. He does not say why. He posts the list of retained names on the kitchen door in the clerk's careful hand, and yours is on it. And when you find it there, your knees go strange, because a name on a list is the difference, this winter of all winters, between a boy with a place and a boy on the roads. Half your attic floor is not on the list. You help carry more than one wooden box down those scooped stone stairs that autumn, and shake more than one hand at the courtyard gate, and learn the particular ache of watching a world disperse politely, man by man, each departure sensible, the sum of them an amputation. Colas leaves on the 9th day. You know before he says it. You knew, honestly, on the morning of the 6th, watching him watch the flower wagons roll off toward Paris in the king's own wake. The trade has moved. The court is at the Tuileries now. The assembly itself packs up within the fortnight and follows. And where they go, the dinners go, and where the dinners go, goes Colas. He spends his last evening doing the strangest thing you ever saw him do, going down the service corridors with a wet rag, wiping out his chalk marks. Every cross, every dot, every crescent, a year and a half of intelligence, gone from the door frames one by one. Leave them, you say. Who'd know what they meant? I'd know they were there. He works the last one, the cross with the dot, the first one you ever saw, off the bakehouse door frame with his thumbnail, and looks at the clean wood for a moment. First rule of the trade, Norman. When the wave's done, get off it clean. Chalk washes. Make sure everything you write does. At the gate in the morning he shakes your hand like a merchant closing, then ruins it by hugging you like a brother, fast and hard once. He has a place already fixed, of course he does, with a caterer in the Palais Royal, the roaring heart of the new Paris, where deputies must dine and journalists must dine, and, he says, revolutions are just dinners with printing presses. Rue Saint-Honoré, 5 years, he says, walking backwards down the avenue, pointing at you. Cook shop. My own sign. You'll bake my bread. I'll cheat you on the wages. It'll be beautiful. And he turns and walks toward Paris with his whole life in one bag, 17 years old, entirely unafraid, and the avenue takes him the way it took the carriage, and you go back inside and bake bread for the inventory men and the attic. That night holds one boy in a bed built for 2, and you would not have believed a person could miss the sound of somebody else counting in their sleep. The town learns its future the way towns do, at the market, in numbers. Rosalie says it plainest because Rosalie was always the town's honest ledger. You find her in November behind a stall shrunk back to its original plank. No queue, the charity pot gone, needed now at the church door instead, and she is there filling it, mind. But it can no longer live at a stall that cannot feed it. Look at my ladies, she says, and you look down the market and understand. The wig-makers' wives are not buying, because the wigs went to Paris. The tailors are not buying, because the liveries are cancelled. The laundresses, the chairmen, the sword cutlers, the lodging-keepers, the 2,000 market gardeners with salad and no tables. The whole delicate lattice of trades that lived off the court's leavings, rung below rung, is discovering what it means when the top of the ladder is simply lifted away. 40 years I've fed this town off the darling's table, Rosalie says. The darling? She'll call him that to her grave. And I never once thought to ask what we'd all eat if he pushed his chair back. She snorts, ties her shawl, straightens her plank like a soldier dressing his one remaining button. Well, now the whole town's at the Cerdo door, boy, and nothing's coming out. The Cerdo door itself, you pass it most days in the emptied service wing, is locked and stays locked, and the last time you stop there you can still see, if you crouch to a boy's hand height, the pale ghost where a chalk cross with a dot has been wiped away. It is Guillaume who gives you the other ghost. Clearing the Cour Royale in the days after, all the boys were drafted to it. You had found, trodden edgewise into the mud where 60,000 feet had passed, a small brass tag stamped 23. You had cleaned it on your sleeve and carried it in your pocket 3 days before you could face bringing it to him, because the sword was not with it, and you knew what his swords were to him. But Guillaume only turned the tag over once, like a man identifying a fallen soldier, and then, to your bewilderment, laughed, really laughed, the first laugh you'd heard in a week. "Rented on the 5th of October, he said. "1 deposit, never returned. Somewhere out there, boy, is a man who walked into the greatest day of the age dressed as a gentleman on my 6 sous, and hasn't dared bring it back." He pocketed the tag. "Best transaction of my life. The sword's seen history. I'd have paid it." But by December his trestle is folded. There is no crowd at the gates to dress, and, he says it without self-pity, as a man reports weather, no certainty the palace of the future will require gentlemen at all. The last afternoon he does inventory, the hats brushed and boxed, the swords oiled and racked in his cellar, each tag checked against the book, 50 years of small ceremony wound up in an hour. And then he takes down one hanger. Old, blunt as a spoon, its brass tag missing because its brass tag is in his waistcoat pocket, and holds it out to you flat across both palms, the way you present a thing that is more than the thing. "Number 23, he says. "Take it." "Père Guillaume, I can't." "You can. You're the last man in Versailles it made a gentleman of, and the deposit," he says gravely, "was your sister's word of honour, which I find I am still holding, and which is the soundest security I ever took." He girds it on you himself, one last ceremony, adjusts the hang of it, steps back, surveys, nods. "There. Whatever comes, boy, and what's coming, no rentier of hats can tell you. You've seen the inside of the show, and you went in on your own legs. A sword makes a gentleman the way a saucepan makes a cook, which is to say," and he taps your chest once precisely where the heart is, "it doesn't. It never did. That was always the secret, and now the whole world's found it out, and an old man can shut his shop. You walk home through the twilight with a sword on your hip and no rank, no rental, no hurry, past the locked gates, and if anyone had told you 2 Octobers ago that this would be the saddest walk of your year, you would have laughed in their Norman face. Thérèse, being Thérèse, is the one soul in Versailles for whom the catastrophe arrives dressed as a bargain, because rents collapse. Of course they do. A town built to lodge the traffic of a court has lost the court. The innkeepers who tripled their prices for the deputies now stand in doorways of empty rooms, and the little shop with the bowed front window in the Rue de la Paroisse, the one she has walked past on purpose, taking the long way for 2 years, comes down by Christmas to a rent that her stocking, the stocking with your Christmas candle money folded into it, can actually carry. She takes it in January with the grim face of a general accepting a surrendered city he knows he cannot feed, and she says the truth of it out loud once, while you help her scrub the shelves. "I wanted the roof for 10 years, Michel. I get it the winter the sky falls. That's the bargain this town offers now. Everything's cheap, including us." Then she stands up, wipes her hands, looks at the little cold room with its bowed window, and you watch your mother's level grey eyes take their measure of the new world exactly as they took the old ones. Flowers in season, seeds and greens off the market gardeners, who must sell somewhere. Soup may be at the back winter mornings. She has watched Rosalie all her life. The palace fed this town like a lord, she says. Gone. Good. We'll feed it like neighbours. Smaller portions. Longer lease. Everyone in this town serves somebody. She chose the master that can't die. You told her, that day, that you'd remembered the sentence. She claimed, absolutely, never to have said it. Berto takes the tourtière down on the last Sunday of the year. No announcement. You come in out of the sleet from the wood store, and the shelf is empty, and your stomach drops as if the shelf were a person, and then you see him at the great table with his sleeves rolled, and the pan is in front of him, and he is lining it with pastry as gently as a man bandaging a hand. You and the 2 remaining boys and Fournier stand about uselessly, the way people stand at the edge of another man's sacrament. He makes the pie the old Rouen way, his wife's way, he says, without being asked, in the voice of a man reading from something behind his eyes, a cook-shop pie, rabbit and pork and mustard, food for people who work standing up. It bakes while the sleet ticks on the windows of the emptiest palace in Europe, and the smell of it fills the vaulted kitchen, and the smell is the whole vanished world, not the court's world. The world before that, under it, older than it, the world of small shops and married cooks that fed France before Versailles and will be feeding it long after. He cuts it into exact shares at the plank where the boys have always eaten standing, and this one time at his nod everyone sits. 30 years I kept that pan bright for her and never used it, he says at the end to no one and all 4 of you. Told myself it was mourning, it was cowardice. A pan's for pies, not for grief. He runs his thumb once around the copper rim, then pushes the tourtière across the plank to you, through the crumbs, like a man moving a chess piece he has thought about for a long time. A cook's pan outlives kings, boy. We know that now for a fact, don't we? See it outlives me too. And mind you use it. That's the whole instruction. Use it. You will use it. 60 years of pies. But that is far downstream of tonight. And Pichon keeps his promise on the last mild day of autumn, before the year quite dies. He appears at the bakehouse door at dawn on your free Sunday with 2 heels of bread and his walking stick and says only, "She's waiting," and you walk out together, down off the dry hill of Versailles, 3 miles north through woods the colour of old copper to the river. You hear her for the last mile, the sound swelling from that lifelong horizon, grumble into weather, into surf, into the biggest sound you've ever stood inside. And then the valley opens and there she is, the machine of Marley, the 14 great wheels standing in the grey Seine in their timber galleries, each one taller than your church at home, turning, turning, black with a century of water, hurling spray into the light, and above them the hillside climbing in stages of pipe and pump house and rocking iron all the way up to the stone arches of the aqueduct against the sky. The whole impossible apparatus, hauling the river uphill, stroke by groaning stroke, exactly as it has done every day and night for 105 years, for fountains that no king will walk toward, for basins standing glass still in front of shuttered windows. The signal whistles are retired. The water leaps for nobody, and still she pumps, because nobody has told her, because a machine cannot be told, because, Pichon says it, leaning on his stick watching his life's employer thunder. She doesn't know, boy. That's the mercy of machines. She'll grind on for whoever's next, kings, nations, nobody at all, and never feel the difference. It's only men that have to know things. He watches a long time. The spray drifts and beads on your 2 coats like the finest rain. They'll scrap her some day. Not soon. Nothing that's stubborn goes soon. But some day some sensible age with better pumps will take her apart and sell the iron, and on that day, mark me, there won't be a man alive who can say what it cost to make a dry hill sing. He turns his collar up. Done. Sermon over. 60 years of vocation folded away as workmanlike as his levels. There. You've seen the thing that carried you. Now you can say so. Precious few ever bother. Every man should see the thing that's carrying him. You stand and see it until the cold moves you both, and then you walk home mostly in silence, and the grinding follows you all the way up the hill, and that night, in the attic, for the first time in your life, the sound on the horizon does not sound like a giant's teeth. It sounds like breathing, like something very old and very tired doing its work in its sleep, faithfully, for no reason left but faithfulness. Your last long walk through the palace comes in deep December, and it is lawful, and it is your work, and it is the reason this whole story exists. Fires against the damp, sheets against the dust, and rounds against everything else. The skeleton household walks the staterooms on winter evenings, checking shutters, checking hearths, and in the failing light of the year the rounds fall sometimes to a trusted boy with a lantern. So it is that Michel of Falaise, baker of servants' bread, comes to walk the hall of mirrors alone, at dusk with a lantern burning. You counted them out of the sack that morning, and you know, the tag ends of the king's own candles, 240 feet of gathering dark. Your wooden soles announcing you the whole way, drum, 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 17 arched windows going blue-black on your left, and on your right, in the 17 mirrors, a single small flame walking with you. One light. Were you once heard there had been 3,000, multiplied now not into a republic of flames, but into a procession of one lantern diminishing down a corridor of glass. You, and you, and you, and you, smaller and smaller, into the dark. The gods still boil on the ceiling, too high for the light to reach more than a hem of cloud. The clocks. This is the detail you will never be able to tell without stopping a moment, and I will not try to improve it. The clocks are still wound. The clock room, the antechambers, the gilded cabinets. The caretakers wind them because caretakers wind clocks. And so all through the shuttered dark of the emptiest palace on earth, the ticking goes on, room after room after room, thousands of small brass hearts keeping perfect time for nobody, chiming the quarter hours to the furniture under its sheets. You stand at the centre of the gallery where the king stood on his balcony over the roaring court, and you listen to the palace tick, and hear, one time only, because that is this channel's law, is the one thing the boy with the lantern cannot know, and you, in your warm bed more than 2 centuries downstream, do. No king will ever live here again. Not ever. The family that rode down the avenue in the rain will not come back. History knows, and the boy does not, and let the knowing stay gentle tonight. Harder years are coming for the baker and the baker's wife than any march in the rain, and the world they were carried off to build will not keep them. Other crowns will rise in France and fall again, and not one of them will dare to sleep in this bed. The palace will stand a century in its sheets, will be a museum, a monument, a mirror for the whole earth to file past. 20,000 strangers a day, decently dressed, no sword required, and it will never once again be what it was on the morning you first carried bread across its service court. A house. The largest, strangest, hungriest, most magnificent house that human beings ever kept, and of the ones who kept it, The real ones, the 10,000, the ones whose names survive only in wage ledgers if there. The boys in the bakehouse at 4 in the morning, the fountain men listening to pipes, the women carving the king's leavings into 11 portions, the old soldiers renting swords at the gate. History closed over them quietly, as it closes over almost everyone. Whoever they were, one by one, in Paris garrets and Norman villages and little shops with bowed windows, they grew old telling it. I was there. I was inside it. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. And they were right. Nobody quite believed them. That is why this channel exists. The lantern burns low. You have rounds to finish, and then the walk across the dark street to the Grand Common, and the 4 flights, and the bed. So finish the rounds with him. The last shutters latched, the last hearth banked. Out through the service door, always his door, into the December air, sharp as well water, under more stars than the town has ever shown before, because the town is dark now, and dark towns get the stars back. Across the empty street where his soul's echo. Up the scooped stone stairs, past the sleeping floors, to the little room under the tiles. The attic is cold, and the bed is narrow, and the blankets smell of you, and none of this troubles you at all, because you're 16 going on 17, and you have carried wood since 5 and walked a palace since dusk, and your body is going out from under you like a tide. Tomorrow there will be bread to bake, for fewer, but still bread. Tomorrow there will be water to haul, and fires against the damp, and Teresa's shelves to build on your free afternoon, and the pie pan to season, because he told you to use it and you will. Tomorrow the inventory men will want their soup, and the clocks will want their winding, and the machine will grind its river uphill in its sleep. But that's tomorrow. Tonight there is only this, the mattress taking your weight, the blanket's rough wool at your chin, St. Michael fading on his nail with his half-escaped devil, the sword called 23 standing in the corner, the copper pan under the bed where the candle sack hangs, filling again stub by stub, 'cause some habits are the shape of a life and there is no shame in that. You're warm enough, fed enough, invisible enough, and you know now what the palace never learned. Invisible is not the same as unnecessary. You have a place, and a sister with a roof, and work for your hands in the morning. That's more than the man who owned 2,300 rooms can say tonight. That's enough. It was always going to have to be enough, and here is the secret the whole gilded hill never learned. It is, listen, the town is quiet. The bells are done till morning. Somewhere below a caretaker's fire settles. Somewhere across the dark gardens 1,000 clocks tick in step for nobody. And away on the north horizon, faithful as breathing, the old machine grinds on, carrying the river uphill in the dark, the way it carried it before you came, the way it will carry it after. The sound your bones know best in all the world. The sound that means the work is being done and you are not the one who has to do it. Not now, not till morning. Centuries will pass. The town you know will change beyond recognition. The machine will fall silent at last and be sold for iron, just as Pichon said. The Grand Commune will fill and empty a dozen ways. Clerks, soldiers, a hospital, restorers, and hardly anyone crossing the street will look up and think, 1,000 people slept here and fed a world. The palace will belong to everyone, finally and completely, the way it always half pretended to, but people will still rise in the dark to bake for people they'll never meet, still gather the leavings and make them a living, still count their small hoards and share beds for warmth, and stand at locked gates and walk in, decently dressed, to stare at the glory and go home again to the narrow rooms where the real life is. Some things don't change. The ladder changes. The people on it don't. The work doesn't. The tiredness at the end of it. The good tiredness. The kind you've earned. The kind you're feeling now. That doesn't change at all. So let it come. Let sleep take you the way it took a boy in an attic above the bakehouse of the Grand Commune more than 2 centuries ago, with flour still under his fingernails and a whole vanished world ticking softly across the street. Let the palace fade. Let the clocks tick unwatched. Let the river climb the hill without you. Let the noise quiet. Let your thoughts slow and soften and finally stop. You've earned this rest. Whatever you carried today, set it down. The machine will grind on without you till morning, faithful as breathing, and nothing it carries is yours to hold tonight. Take the rest, and dream of whatever dreams may come. Good night.